I booked an Airbnb in late September because I needed a few quiet days away from the city. The listing looked simple, an older one-bedroom guest house behind a larger home in a small rural town. The photos showed a small kitchen, a wooden deck, and a big yard with trees around it. The host had good reviews, mostly short comments like, "Clean place and nice area." I didn't think much about it. I just wanted peace and a place to sleep and write. The drive there took about 5 hours. The roads turned from highways to two-lane roads, then to cracked back roads lined with overgrown weeds and trees. By the time I arrived, it was late afternoon. The main house looked lived in but quiet. The guest house sat behind it, separated by a short gravel path. It was small and plain, with faded white paint and a single light over the porch. I noticed the windows were old, with dust caught in the corners, and the door made a long creak when I pushed it open. Inside, it smelled faintly of cleaning spray mixed with something else, like old wood that had soaked up years of humidity. The floorboards were uneven and creaked in random spots. The living area was simple. A small couch, a coffee table, a TV mounted on the wall. The kitchen had just enough for one person, a stove, a small fridge, and a kettle. The bedroom was off to the right. The bedspread was freshly washed but thin, and the curtains didn't close all the way. I unpacked, made some coffee, and sat outside on the porch for a bit, just watching the sun drop behind the trees. That first night, I slept fine, though I kept waking up to faint noises outside, like twigs snapping or leaves shifting. I assumed it was animals. The area was rural, after all. Still, there was something about the silence that felt heavy, the kind that makes your own breathing sound too loud. The next morning, I went into town for breakfast and to pick up groceries. When I came back, I noticed the curtains in the bedroom were slightly open, even though I remembered closing them before leaving. I didn't think much about it at first. Maybe I hadn't pulled them tight. But when I set my bags down, I realized the blanket on the bed was wrinkled like someone had sat on it. I brushed it off as my imagination, even though something about it made me uneasy. I tried to focus on my work the rest of the day. I sat at the small kitchen table, typing, and every so often I heard faint sounds from the main house. A door shutting, a floorboard creaking. I hadn't seen the host since I arrived, and that was fine by me. Around evening, I went out to sit on the deck again. The yard felt strangely quiet. No birds, no wind. Just still air and the sound of my chair creaking when I shifted. When I went inside later, I noticed something that made me pause. The bathroom door, which I always kept slightly open, was now closed. I pushed it open slowly. The mirror above the sink had faint smudges, like someone had touched it with wet hands. The air felt damp and colder than the rest of the house. I checked the window, it was shut tight. I stood there for a while, staring at my reflection, trying to make sense of it. I told myself it must have been humidity, or maybe I had touched it without noticing earlier. That night, I left the light on in the bathroom, just a small glow under the door. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a noise, a low, slow scrape from the kitchen area. I froze, trying to figure out if I was dreaming. The sound came again, like something dragging lightly across the counter. I didn't move for a full minute. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Then everything went silent again. I got up quietly, grabbed the flashlight from my bag, and stepped out of the bedroom. The kitchen looked normal, but something was different. One of the cabinet doors was slightly open, and there were faint streaks on the counter, like moisture had been wiped across it. I checked the locks on the doors and windows. Everything was still shut. I didn't sleep much after that. In the morning, I noticed a muddy footprint near the back door. Just one, faint but clear. I had taken my shoes off at the front door when I came in last night. This footprint was from a different shoe size, larger than mine. I cleaned it up quickly, pretending it wasn't there, but it stayed in my mind the rest of the day. By the third day, I was jumpy over every little noise. I kept checking the windows, making sure they were locked. That evening, I decided I'd leave early the next morning. I couldn't relax there anymore. I packed most of my stuff before going to bed. Sometime around midnight, I woke up again. I didn't know why at first, just an uneasy feeling. Then I realized I could hear soft, steady breathing. It wasn't mine. It was coming from the direction of the living room. I stayed still, staring at the bedroom doorway. The air felt heavy, like the room was holding its breath. The breathing stopped, replaced by the faintest floorboard creak. I didn't move for a long time. Then I reached for my phone, using the screen light instead of the flashlight. I stood and took one quiet step toward the doorway. The living room was pitch black except for the bathroom light spilling across part of the floor. I aimed my phone's light toward the couch. It was empty. I slowly moved the light across the room. The curtains were drawn now, though I had left them open earlier. I stayed awake until the first sign of daylight. The moment I saw the sky turning gray, I grabbed my bags, shoved the rest of my things inside, and left. When I stepped out onto the deck, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. On the dirt just beside the steps, there were two sets of footprints, one mine from earlier and another set deeper and larger, leading up to the door and back toward the side of the house. I didn't stop to check the main house. I walked straight to my car, loaded my stuff, and drove off without looking back. I didn't even lock the guest house door. When I reached the end of the road, I finally pulled over and sat for a few minutes, trying to calm down. My hands were shaking. Later that day, when I was finally somewhere with phone service, I went back to the Airbnb listing to make sure I had the right place. The listing was gone. The entire page said, "This property is no longer available." I never figured out who had been inside that guest house, or if someone had been staying in the main house at all. But for weeks afterward, every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing that single muddy footprint by the back door, the one that wasn't mine. I booked an Airbnb out in the middle of nowhere because I needed a few quiet days to reset. It was a small single-story cabin in the woods, a few miles off the main road. The listing made it look simple but cozy, with big windows, a small deck, and a lake view. The host had good reviews and the photos showed a neat, clean space. It seemed perfect for a few nights alone. The road to get there was narrow and rough, and my phone signal dropped about 10 minutes before I reached the property. The last part of the drive was through a tunnel of trees that blocked out most of the light. When I finally saw the cabin, it looked almost exactly like the pictures, but something about it felt different in person, like it was too quiet, too cut off. There were no nearby houses, no lights through the trees, nothing but the woods and the sound of the wind pushing through them. Inside, it smelled faintly of old wood and cleaning chemicals. The furniture was plain. A couch, a small table, a bed pushed against the wall. The air felt heavy, like the place had been closed up for a while. I unpacked my bag, walked through every room, and checked the doors and windows out of habit. Everything seemed fine. The first night was peaceful. I sat on the small deck as the sun went down, and the forest turned dark around me. The only sounds were the crickets and the faint lapping of the lake water. I went to bed early, tired from the drive. I remember hearing small noises outside during the night, maybe branches cracking or something moving through the leaves, but I told myself it was just animals. The next morning, I found the trash can on the deck tipped over. I assumed raccoons or maybe a stray dog had done it. I cleaned it up and didn't think much of it. Later that day, I walked down to the lake. There was a small wooden dock and a bench at the edge. The water was still, almost mirror-like. I sat there for a while, just listening to the quiet. I didn't see anyone, not even a boat in the distance. When I got back to the cabin, I noticed something that made me pause. One of the side windows, the one near the kitchen, was open. I was sure I had closed all of them the night before. The latch was still unlocked. I checked the rest and everything else was shut. I told myself maybe I had just forgotten that one. Still, I locked it firmly and double-checked before going to bed that night. That night, I couldn't fall asleep easily. It felt like the woods outside were louder, like there were more cracks and footsteps than before. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just wildlife again. But there was a sound that came later that froze me. It was light, slow footsteps on the deck outside. They moved carefully, like someone didn't want to be heard. I held my breath, staring up at the ceiling, listening. The steps stopped for a few seconds, then I heard a faint creak, like someone touching the door handle. I didn't move. I waited, barely breathing, until the sound faded away. When the morning light came, I got up and checked the door. It was still locked, but there were smudges near the handle, like fingerprints. I checked the deck. The dust on the wooden boards showed faint footprints, bare feet, smaller than mine. They led from the steps to the door and then disappeared off the edge toward the side of the cabin. I felt uneasy, but I kept telling myself it had to be a kid from a nearby house, maybe exploring. But I never saw any other houses driving in. I didn't even see power lines. I tried to shake it off, made some coffee, and sat inside with the curtains half closed. Later that day, I decided to leave my car keys and wallet on the kitchen counter while I took a short nap. When I woke up, the sun was already going down, and the cabin looked dim. I went to the kitchen and froze. My keys were gone. I checked every counter, the floor, under the couch, the table, even my bag. They weren't anywhere. I thought maybe I had moved them and forgot, but I couldn't find them no matter where I looked. I felt that quiet panic creeping in. Being far away from people, no phone signal, and no keys to leave. I stepped outside to check if maybe I had dropped them by the car. As I walked around it, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The driver's side door was slightly open. I hadn't opened it since I arrived. I looked inside, and there they were, my keys sitting neatly on the passenger seat. I didn't remember putting them there. I shut the door and locked it again, trying to convince myself I was just being careless. But the feeling in my chest wouldn't settle. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. I kept the small kitchen knife on the nightstand and left one of the lamps on. Every sound from the woods made me flinch. Around 2 in the morning, I heard something again. The soft creak of the deck boards. The same slow movement, one careful step at a time. Then silence. I stared at the door, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. Minutes passed, maybe longer, and I finally heard something else. The sound of the back window sliding up. I knew I had locked it, but the sound was clear, slow, deliberate. I didn't move. I just lay there, staring at the dark shape of the window across the room. I thought about running, but the only exit was through the main door, right next to that window. Then I heard breathing. Not mine, soft, uneven breathing coming from somewhere inside the cabin. It was close. I got up slowly, grabbed the knife, and backed toward the door. I didn't turn on any lights. I just reached for the lock as quietly as I could, opened the door, and ran. I didn't stop to look back. I ran straight to my car, unlocked it, and started it with shaking hands. I reversed down the narrow dirt path without even turning around fully, just enough to get distance between me and that cabin. When I finally reached the main road, I stopped to catch my breath. I drove until I saw a gas station miles away and parked there until morning. The next day, I called the Airbnb host once I got a signal. I told them I was checking out early. I didn't say why. They didn't ask. A week later, I checked the listing again out of curiosity. It was gone, completely removed from the site. Sometimes I still think about that night. I wonder if someone had been living there, hiding between stays, waiting for whoever came next. The quiet steps, the open window, the missing keys, all of it made sense when I thought about that. It wasn't ghosts or anything supernatural. It was something much worse. Someone who knew exactly how to stay quiet, how to move in the dark, and how to make sure you'd never know they were there until it was almost too late. I booked a small Airbnb cabin in northern Georgia for a week. It was supposed to be quiet and peaceful, somewhere I could rest and write. The listing said it was surrounded by woods, with a small gravel road leading up to it. The photos looked normal, wood walls, an open porch, a fire pit out back. I arrived around 6 p.m., just before sunset, after a long drive from Atlanta. My phone lost service a few miles before reaching the property. I didn't think much of it. The last stretch of road to the cabin was narrow and covered in leaves. Felt like no one had driven there in weeks. When I finally pulled up, the place looked smaller than it did in the photos. The siding was darker, and the roof had some moss growing on it. There was another old cabin visible through the trees maybe 100 yards away, but it looked abandoned. The driveway ended in dirt and the woods were close on both sides, thick and dark. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly like damp wood and something metallic. The air was still and heavy, like no one had opened a window in a long time. I checked every room, small kitchen, one bedroom, one bathroom, and a short hallway that led to a closet. Everything was tidy but felt slightly off, like someone had cleaned in a hurry. There were no personal items, no notes, no welcome touches, just bare essentials. When I unpacked my bag and turned on the lights, I noticed that a few bulbs flickered. One in the hallway went completely out, leaving the space in a half-dark shadow. The hum of the fridge was the only sound. I tried to settle in, made some food, and sat outside for a bit as it got dark. The woods behind the cabin felt deeper than they looked from the road. I could barely see the tree line anymore, just blackness between the trunks. Later that night, around 11, I started hearing faint movement outside. It wasn't animals, these were slow, heavy steps. They didn't come close, just paced around in the distance. I assumed it was a deer or maybe a stray dog. I didn't look out the window. I told myself not to be paranoid. The next morning, I found footprints in the dirt near the porch. Bare feet, adult-sized. They led from the tree line to the steps and then back toward the woods. The ground was dry, and the prints were clear, which meant they weren't from rain or old mud. I felt uneasy but tried to reason with it. Maybe someone lived in the nearby cabin. Maybe they wandered over at night. I went for a walk down the gravel road, hoping to find a neighbor or another cabin. After half a mile, the road just stopped. The trees on both sides grew thicker and thicker, and the path turned into a tangle of roots and rocks. There were no houses, no mailboxes, no signs. It felt like the place didn't exist on a map. When I got back, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. The door to the storage shed behind the cabin was slightly open. I hadn't even realized there was a shed when I arrived. It was half hidden by bushes and trees. The padlock hung from the latch, but it wasn't locked. I walked over and pushed the door open a little. The smell inside hit me first, rotting wood and mildew. There were tools, old boards, and what looked like folded tarps. In the corner was a broken chair and a mattress rolled up tight with bungee cords. The air felt cold inside, colder than outside. I shut the door and went back in the cabin. That evening, I tried to distract myself by watching something on my laptop, but the power flickered twice. Each time, the lights dimmed almost completely before coming back. I decided to go to bed early. As I lay there, I could hear something faint from the woods again. The same slow steps, but closer. I waited, holding my breath. Then I heard the sound of something brushing against the wall outside. The sound of a hand dragging slowly across the wood. I stayed still until it stopped. Then silence. I couldn't sleep for hours. I woke up around 3 a.m. to total darkness. The power was out completely. I could hear my own breathing and the faint creaking of the cabin settling. Then, from somewhere in the house, there was a soft thud. Not from outside, from inside. I sat up, heart pounding. The sound came again, this time from the hallway. It was slow, like someone dragging their foot across the floor. I didn't move for several minutes. My phone had no signal. I grabbed the flashlight from my bag and turned it on. The beam caught the hallway door slightly open. I was sure I'd closed it before going to bed. I walked slowly toward it, shining the light along the floor. Dust and footprints were visible on the wood. Bare footprints again, leading toward the closet. The closet door was open just an inch. I stood there, light shaking in my hand, staring at it. When I finally pulled the door open, there was nothing inside except the usual shelf and an old blanket. But there was a small crawl space at the back I hadn't noticed before. A square cutout in the wall, maybe 2 feet high. It was just black inside. I crouched down and shined the light in. Something reflected back faintly, metal, maybe. I reached in a little with the flashlight and saw a pair of dirty scissors, a few nails, and a small stack of photographs. The photos were of the cabin. Some from the porch, some from the inside. In one, I could see the same couch I'd been sitting on the night before, but the angle was from outside the window. Another showed the bed I was sleeping in with the blanket pulled halfway back. The most recent one was taken in the dark. My flashlight beam caught the white reflection of eyes in the corner of the frame. I dropped the photos, grabbed my keys, and ran outside. The woods were silent, almost too still. My car was parked near the edge of the drive, but the trunk was slightly open. I hadn't opened it. I didn't look inside. I just got in, started the engine, and backed out fast, crunching over the gravel and dirt. I didn't stop until I reached the main road, several miles away. When I finally found a gas station with signal, I called the Airbnb host. The number was disconnected. I checked the listing again. It was gone, completely removed. A week later, I got an email from Airbnb's support team saying the property had been suspended due to safety concerns. They didn't say what that meant. Out of curiosity, I searched the address on Google Maps again. Street view showed an empty lot surrounded by trees. No cabin. No sign it had ever been there. I never went back to retrieve my things. The only thing that stuck with me was one of the photos I still had in my jacket pocket, the one that showed the bed. I noticed something I hadn't before. In the corner of the frame, behind the curtain, there was a shadowed shape of someone crouched low, just watching. I booked the Airbnb because it was cheap and close to the small town I had to visit for a work project. It was an old single-story house on the edge of a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by overgrown grass and half-dead trees. The photos online made it look cozy, but when I pulled up that afternoon, I could tell the pictures were taken years ago. The paint on the wooden panels was peeling, the porch steps sagged, and the yard hadn't been cut in weeks. Still, I was tired from the long drive and just wanted a place to sleep. Inside, the air felt stale, like it hadn't been opened up in a long time. There was a faint smell of damp wood and something else I couldn't quite place, like old carpet that had been wet and dried too many times. The floorboards creaked under my shoes with every step. The living room had mismatched furniture, a faded brown couch, and an old TV that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The kitchen was small, with an old refrigerator that hummed louder than it should. I put my bags in the corner and decided to check the rest of the house. There were 2 bedrooms. The one I picked had a large window that looked out to the backyard, which was even more overgrown than the front. There was a shed in the corner of the yard, half hidden by weeds, and the door to it hung slightly open. I told myself it was probably just old junk inside, but something about it made me uneasy. The room had a queen-sized bed with clean sheets, a small table, and a lamp that flickered when I turned it on. The other bedroom was smaller, with a twin bed and a dresser covered in dust. I left that one alone. I made myself a simple dinner from the groceries I brought and sat at the small kitchen table. The silence in the house felt heavy. Every small sound, the refrigerator clicking, the wind moving through the trees outside, stood out too much. When I went to take a shower later, I noticed the bathroom door didn't lock properly. The handle was loose, and the door would slowly swing open if not pushed closed hard enough. The shower water took forever to heat up and had a metallic smell. I remember feeling a bit uncomfortable, not scared exactly, just uneasy, like I wasn't supposed to be there. That night, I lay in bed scrolling on my phone until I couldn't keep my eyes open. The crickets outside were loud, but at least it wasn't completely silent. I must have dozed off around midnight. Sometime later, I woke up suddenly, not because of a sound, but because of the kind of alert feeling you get when your body knows something is off. The room was dark except for a bit of moonlight coming through the blinds. I stayed still for a few seconds, just listening. I thought I heard faint footsteps, slow and careful, coming from the living room. At first, I thought maybe it was the house settling or some animal outside, but the steps had a rhythm, a human rhythm. My heart started beating faster. I didn't move, just stared toward my door, which I had closed but not locked. I could hear the soft sound of the floor creaking near the hallway. The steps stopped for a long time. I waited, barely breathing, until I finally convinced myself it was nothing and closed my eyes again. But just when I started drifting off, I heard the sound of the bathroom door slowly moving. The same squeaky sound I noticed earlier. I sat up in bed, listening. I was sure I had closed that door tightly after my shower. The silence after that sound was worse than the sound itself. I reached for my phone to check the time. It was 2:43 a.m. I turned on the flashlight and pointed it toward the door, half expecting to see the knob turning. Nothing. I told myself maybe a draft from an open window caused it, even though I knew I had shut every window before bed. Eventually, I managed to fall back asleep, but it was light and uneasy. The next morning, I noticed something strange. The front door, which I clearly remembered locking, was slightly open. Not wide, but enough to see light from outside coming through the crack. I stood there staring at it, trying to convince myself I had forgotten to lock it, but I knew I hadn't. I even remembered checking the lock twice. I went out and looked around the yard, but there were no footprints or signs of anyone being there. The shed in the back still stood half open, and for a second I thought about checking it, but I didn't. I wasn't sure why, but I couldn't bring myself to walk over there. I spent the day working from my laptop at the table, but I couldn't shake that feeling of being watched. Every time I looked toward the backyard window, I felt like someone was just out of view. That night, I pushed a chair under the door handle and double-checked every lock before getting into bed. I kept the light on this time. Around 3 a.m., I woke up again. The first thing I noticed was that the room smelled different. A faint scent of sweat and dirt. My chest tightened when I realized it wasn't there before. I looked toward the door and saw that the chair I had wedged under the handle was slightly moved, tilted sideways like something had pushed against it. I felt a wave of cold fear run through me. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight again. The door was still closed, but I could see small smudges near the handle, like fingerprints. I got out of bed slowly and checked the front door. It was closed this time, but the deadbolt was unlocked. That was enough for me. I packed my bag in less than 5 minutes, threw everything in my car, and left. As I drove away, my hands were shaking so much I could barely hold the steering wheel. The house faded in the rearview mirror, sitting there like it had been waiting for me to leave. I didn't stop driving until I was 2 towns away. I pulled into a gas station parking lot and just sat there, trying to calm down. Later that day, I went back to the Airbnb app to report what happened. The listing was gone. Not booked or unavailable. Completely deleted, like it had never existed. No host name, no reviews, nothing. I tried checking my email for the booking confirmation, but even that link was broken. It just said, "This listing is no longer available." I never found out who owned that house or why the listing disappeared so quickly. But I keep thinking about the smell in that room, the fingerprints on the door, and that shed in the backyard with the half-open door. I still don't know if someone was living there, coming in at night while guests stayed. But I know for sure that someone else had been inside that house while I slept. And I'm just glad I left when I did, because I can't stop thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't. I booked a small Airbnb outside a quiet town in Tennessee. It looked nice in the pictures, just a 1-bedroom cabin tucked away behind a line of pines. The reviews said it was peaceful and private, the kind of place where you could clear your head. I had been dealing with too much noise lately, city noise, work noise, just noise in general. I wanted silence. The listing mentioned it was on an old property, about a 10-minute drive down a dirt road from the main highway. That sounded perfect to me. I arrived late in the evening, right before sunset. The host had left the key in a lockbox next to the door. The cabin looked older than the pictures. The paint was chipped, the steps were soft under my boots, and the windows looked a little foggy from the outside. The air was thick with that damp, earthy smell you get when you're near woods that have been there a long time. It wasn't bad, just different. Inside, it was quiet. The air smelled faintly of old wood and cleaning spray. There was a single main room with a couch, a small kitchen area, a table, and a hallway that led to the bedroom and bathroom. The floor creaked a little when I walked. Everything felt still, like no one had been inside for months. I unpacked a few things, made some instant noodles, and sat down by the little window that looked out into the woods. The light was fading fast, and by the time I finished eating, I could barely see the trees anymore. It got dark quickly out there, no streetlights, no passing cars, nothing. When I went to bed that night, The silence was so deep it almost had a sound of its own. I could hear my own heartbeat, the faint ringing in my ears, the ticking of my watch on the nightstand. I left my phone charging on the counter near the kitchen. The only light came from a small lamp next to the bed. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I started to drift off, some small noise would pull me back. Wood shifting, maybe a mouse, the sound of wind moving through the cracks in the siding. Sometime after midnight, I heard what I thought was a door creaking open. Not the front door, it sounded smaller, slower, like one of the interior doors. I lay still for a long time, staring at the dark ceiling. The air in the room felt colder, like someone had just opened a window. But I told myself it was just the house settling. Old houses make noises. The next morning, everything looked normal again. Sunlight came through the blinds, and the woods outside were bright and harmless looking. I went out for a walk down the dirt road, just to stretch my legs. The road was empty except for tire tracks and some animal prints. The cabin was the only place around for what looked like miles. There was an old shed near the back of the property, half collapsed, with rusty tools scattered inside. I didn't go too close, it looked unstable. Later that afternoon, I noticed something odd. The back door latch, the one that led to the small porch, was unhooked. I was sure I had locked it the night before. It wasn't wide open, just not latched. I didn't think much of it, but I made sure to secure it properly this time. Then I double-checked the windows. Everything else was fine. That night it rained hard. The sound of rain on the metal roof was constant. I sat on the couch with a blanket, scrolling through my phone. Around 10 or 11, the power flickered. The lights dimmed and came back on a few times, and then they went out completely. The only sound left was the rain. I found the flashlight in my bag and used it to move around. I didn't feel scared, just annoyed. The Wi-Fi was down too. I decided to just go to bed early. In the middle of the night, I woke up again. This time it wasn't a creak. It was the sound of something soft dragging against the floorboards. I froze. Came from somewhere down the hallway. I couldn't tell what it was. It moved slowly like fabric brushing wood. Then it stopped. I held my breath, waiting for it again, but there was nothing. I told myself it was probably water dripping or something blown by the wind. I didn't get up to check. I just stayed still until I fell asleep again. The next morning, the power was still out. I went outside to see if maybe a tree had fallen somewhere along the lines, but there was no sign of any damage. I walked around the cabin again, trying to shake off that uneasy feeling from the night before. When I came back to the porch, I noticed something on the steps. Muddy footprints. They weren't mine. They were small, like from bare feet, and they led from the dirt road up to the back door. I just stood there staring at them. The prints were smeared, not fresh, but not too old either. It had rained all night, so they had to have been made after the rain stopped. That meant sometime early in the morning. I checked the back door, it was locked, the latch still in place. I tried to tell myself they were old prints, maybe from before the last rain, but that didn't make sense. I remembered how heavy the downpour had been. Everything else around was washed clean. The uneasiness I had been feeling turned into something sharper. I packed my things and decided to leave a day early. But when I went to start my car, it wouldn't turn over. The engine clicked but didn't start. The lights came on, the radio worked, but the engine wouldn't catch. It had been fine the whole trip before this. I tried again and again, but nothing. I sat there for a few minutes, looking out at the dirt road, thinking about how far the nearest house probably was. I didn't even have cell service out there. I went back inside to wait, thinking maybe I'd try again later when the engine cooled. As I stepped through the door, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The rug near the hallway was slightly crooked. I pulled it back, and there were scratches on the floor underneath. Long, thin scratches, as if something heavy had been dragged across. They led toward the small closet at the end of the hallway. The air felt colder again. I opened the closet door slowly. Inside there were just a few folded blankets on a shelf, nothing else. But the wall behind them looked different, like a section of it had been patched recently. The wood was newer, the color slightly lighter. I stared at it for a while, unsure why it bothered me so much. Then I noticed the latch on the inside of the closet door. It was small, like the kind used to lock something from the inside. That was it for me. I grabbed my bag, locked the front door, and walked down the dirt road until I finally got cell service. I called a tow truck from the nearest town and told them where I was. When the driver showed up 2 hours later, he told me my car's starter wire had been cut clean through. I didn't stay to find out who did it or why. I just left. I never contacted the host, never wrote a review. I still think about those muddy footprints sometimes, and that closet with the latch inside. Every now and then, I look up that Airbnb listing, but it's gone now, like it was never there. I booked an Airbnb in a small town outside Denver because it was cheap and looked quiet. The pictures showed a small wooden cabin behind a bigger house, surrounded by trees, a gravel driveway, and a view of the mountains. I had been driving for 10 hours and just needed a place to rest for a couple of nights. When I got there, it was late afternoon, the sun almost behind the ridge, and everything looked normal, just quiet. The main house looked old, but the cabin looked recently renovated. I checked in using a key from the lockbox. There wasn't anyone around. The host had sent me the code through the app. Inside, it smelled faintly of pine and something like cleaning chemicals. It was small but cozy. A bed against the wall, a small kitchenette, a couch, and a bathroom. The air felt a little humid, like it hadn't been aired out in a while. I opened a window and let the cool mountain air in. Outside, I could hear the wind through the trees and a dog barking somewhere far off. The cabin was a few yards behind the main house, and through the window, I could see an old shed next to the trees. I unpacked my stuff, made some noodles, and watched TV for a bit. Around 10 p.m., I turned off the lights and lay down. The night was quiet, but not silent. Crickets, leaves rustling, occasional thuds from the woods. At first, I thought it was branches falling, but some of the noises were too sharp, like something stepping on twigs. I told myself it was deer or raccoons. I didn't think much of it. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a dull scraping sound. It wasn't inside, but right outside the cabin. It was a long, dragging noise, like something heavy sliding over gravel. My body froze. I waited, holding my breath. The sound stopped. I stared at the ceiling, listening for anything else. Nothing. I told myself it was probably the wind moving something or maybe a raccoon. I stayed awake for a while, then eventually fell back asleep. In the morning, when I stepped outside, there were fresh scrape marks in the gravel near the cabin door. It looked like something had been dragged. A long line that curved around the corner of the cabin and disappeared behind it. I followed it and found nothing, just the backside of the cabin and the line ending at the grass near the shed. I felt uneasy, but I tried not to overthink it. Maybe the owner had moved something overnight, or maybe the wind pushed a trash bin. That day, I went into town, got breakfast, and hiked a nearby trail. I tried to shake the weird feeling off. When I got back in the evening, the main house was still dark. It didn't seem like anyone lived there. The driveway had only my car parked on it. The quiet felt heavier now. I noticed the shed door was slightly open. I thought it had been closed before, but I wasn't sure. I went inside, locked the cabin door, and made dinner. The Wi-Fi worked but was slow. Around 11 p.m., as I scrolled through my phone, I heard the dragging noise again. Same as before, slow, heavy, moving along the gravel. This time it stopped right outside the cabin wall, near the window. I turned off the lamp and sat in the dark, listening. There was a faint sound of breathing, slow, uneven, like someone standing outside trying to stay quiet. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stayed completely still. After a minute, the sound of the gravel started again, moving away from the window toward the shed. I wanted to look, but I couldn't bring myself to pull the curtain back. I stayed sitting up until around 3 a.m., when I finally laid down again, exhausted but still alert. When I stepped out the next morning, I saw clear shoe prints in the dirt next to the cabin. They weren't mine. I could see the pattern of a large boot sole. The prints led toward the shed again. The door was closed now. I went over and tried to peek through a gap in the wood, but it was too dark inside to see anything. I noticed a faint smell coming from the cracks, something sour and metallic. I was supposed to stay one more night, but I decided I'd leave that evening. I packed most of my stuff and sat inside, waiting for daylight to fade. I wanted to see if the person, or whatever it was, would show up again. Around sunset, I turned off the lights and sat by the window, staring out. The shed was barely visible now, just a shadow among shadows. The night deepened. Hours passed, nothing happened. Then, sometime after midnight, I saw movement, something shifting near the shed door. A tall figure stepped out, hunched, moving slowly across the yard. The faint light from my phone screen caught something metallic in its hand. It walked toward the cabin, dragging something heavy behind it. The sound was exactly what I'd heard the nights before. I could barely breathe. I grabbed my keys, phone, and bag, and quietly slipped out the back door on the opposite side. The gravel crunched under my shoes, but the figure didn't seem to notice. I ran through the trees, away from the driveway until I reached the road. My heart was racing so fast I felt dizzy. I hid behind a large rock and watched the cabin. The figure stopped at the door and just stood there for a while, facing it. After a minute, it turned and walked back toward the shed, dragging whatever it had. I stayed hidden until the first light of dawn. When I finally worked up the nerve to go back, the cabin door was wide open. My bag, which I thought I'd grabbed, was sitting by the couch. Everything else looked untouched. The tracks on the gravel were clearer now, boot prints and a long drag mark leading back to the shed. I left without checking inside. I drove straight to a gas station a few miles away, told the clerk I was checking out early, and left a message for the Airbnb host saying there was someone trespassing on the property. A few days later, I got a message from Airbnb saying they'd removed the listing. Out of curiosity, I looked up the address again. It turned out the main house had been abandoned for over 2 years. The host account used fake information and was under investigation. I still think about those nights, the dragging sound, the breathing, the smell from the shed. Whoever that was, they weren't a ghost or anything supernatural. They were just a person, living out there in the woods, using that empty property for something I don't even want to imagine. I still see those scrape marks and footprints in my mind sometimes, and I wonder if I'd stayed one more night, if I would have ended up being the next thing they dragged into that shed. I booked the Airbnb because it was cheap and had good reviews. It was an old cabin on the edge of a small town, surrounded by woods. The pictures made it look simple but cozy. Wooden floors, a little porch, and a view of a forest that looked peaceful in the daylight. I arrived in the late afternoon, just before sunset. The road that led to the cabin was narrow, cracked, and mostly dirt near the end. Trees on both sides leaned over it, and my car's tires kicked up dry leaves that scattered behind me. The cabin sat alone. The nearest neighbor was maybe half a mile away. It was small, about the size of a large shed. The siding looked worn, and the porch light was hanging by a wire, flickering when I first turned it on. There was no one there to greet me. The key was left in a little lockbox next to the door. The air smelled damp, like old wood and soil. Inside, the place was quiet and colder than outside. The floorboards creaked with every step. There was a small living area with a couch that sagged in the middle, a tiny kitchen with chip tiles, and a short hallway that led to a single bedroom and bathroom. Everything looked older than the pictures. The furniture was dusty, and I noticed faint marks on the wall, like something heavy had been leaned or dragged against it at some point. I brushed it off, thinking maybe they'd recently moved some furniture around. I unpacked a few things and made a sandwich. The water from the tap came out brown for a few seconds before clearing. When I sat on the couch to eat, I heard a faint clicking noise from somewhere behind the wall. I thought maybe it was the pipes or some animal outside. The walls were thin. I could hear every sound, the ticking of the clock, the wind brushing against the glass, even the soft hum of the fridge. When it got dark, the woods outside became a black wall. There were no streetlights, and my phone barely had a signal. I could only see what the porch light touched, and that light kept flickering every few seconds. I tried to watch something on my phone but gave up because of the weak reception. Around 11, I decided to sleep. The bed was small and old. The sheets smelled clean but felt damp. I lay there staring at the ceiling, hearing the wind move through the trees. Then I heard a sound, a faint creak from somewhere in the house. I thought it was just the wood settling, but it came again, slow and steady, like weight shifting on the floorboards. I held my breath, listening carefully. It stopped after a few seconds. I got up and looked around. The cabin was small, so it didn't take long to check. Nothing seemed out of place. I looked outside through the window, but the porch light was flickering again, and I could barely see anything beyond a few feet. When I turned back toward the hallway, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The bathroom door, which I was sure I had closed earlier, was now half open. I tried to tell myself maybe I hadn't closed it properly. I walked over and pushed it shut again. It didn't latch right, so I assumed that was it. I went back to bed, but it was hard to sleep. Every little sound felt louder in that quiet house. Around midnight, I finally drifted off. Sometime later, I woke up again. It took me a moment to realize what had woken me. I could hear a faint scraping sound. It wasn't from outside, it was inside the cabin. It came from the kitchen area. I froze. It was slow, uneven, like someone dragging something across the floor. I didn't move. I just listened. The sound stopped, and the silence felt heavy, like the air itself was waiting. After a while, I gathered enough courage to sit up. The light from the porch was still flickering through the window. I could barely see the outline of the hallway. I picked up my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, showing dust in the air. I stepped out of the room slowly, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. The kitchen looked the same. The fridge light was on, casting a faint blue glow. I scanned the floor, nothing. I turned the light toward the living area, and that's when I saw it. The front door was slightly open. I knew I had locked it earlier. I could see the night air moving the edge of the curtain near it. My first thought was that maybe the wind had forced it open, but the door opened inward. The lock was undone. I backed away and grabbed the only thing I could use as a weapon, a small metal pan from the counter. I listened again, but there was no sound now, just the faint hum of the fridge and the wind outside. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, not moving. Eventually, I shut the door, locked it again, and pushed a chair under the handle. I couldn't sleep after that. I sat on the couch, waiting for daylight. Every noise kept my nerves tight. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again, that slow creaking, but this time it was from under the floor. I realized the cabin was built on short stilts with a crawl space beneath it. The sound was directly under me, like something moving through the dirt or brushing against the wood. I moved off the couch quietly, grabbed my bag, and stayed by the door until the faint gray light of dawn finally came through the windows. As soon as it was light enough, I went outside. The air was cold and still. I walked around to the side of the cabin and saw the crawl space opening. It was covered by a loose wooden panel. One corner of the panel had fresh scrape marks on it, and the dirt below looked disturbed, like someone had been dragging or crawling under there recently. I knelt to look closer and saw something that made my chest tighten. There was a torn piece of dark fabric caught on the splintered wood, like part of a shirt or jacket. I didn't stay to look more. I grabbed my things, got in the car, and drove off without even looking back at the cabin. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station in town. I sat there for a while trying to calm down. I didn't call anyone or report it. I just couldn't find the words to explain it without sounding crazy. A few days later, I checked the Airbnb listing again. It was gone, completely removed. The host's profile was still there, but with no other listings. I tried to look up the address, and I found a short news post about a missing person from that area. A man who had been squatting in abandoned cabins around the woods. The description said he'd escaped from a local facility months before and hadn't been found. I never found out if it was him under that cabin or not. But every time I think back to that night, I still hear those slow creaks from under the floor, and I know I wasn't alone in that house. I booked an Airbnb on the edge of a small town in northern Oregon because I needed a quiet weekend away from work. The pictures looked perfect. An old but clean one-bedroom cabin tucked in the woods, with a gravel road leading to it. It looked private, peaceful, and cheap. The host's description mentioned it was once part of a logging property but had been fixed up for guests. That didn't bother me. I just wanted a place to sleep, eat, and relax for a few nights. I got there late in the afternoon, just before sunset. The driveway was narrow, and my tires kicked up gravel as I pulled in. The cabin sat alone at the end of a dirt road surrounded by thick trees. The woods were dense, dark green during the day and almost black underneath the tall pines. The air smelled like wet bark and moss. The cabin was small, maybe 20 feet across, with a tin roof and faded wood siding. There were 2 windows in the front and one on the side near a short porch. The grass around it hadn't been cut in weeks, and I could see old footprints in the mud leading to the porch, maybe from other guests. Inside, it was simple but nice enough. Wooden floors, a small kitchen with a stove, a small bathroom, and a single bed pushed against the wall. There was a faint smell of old wood and something musty, but I told myself it was just from being shut up for a while. I unpacked, made a quick meal, and decided to take a short walk before dark. The woods behind the cabin stretched for miles. The trees were tall and close together, the kind that block most of the sunlight even in the afternoon. I walked a few hundred yards in and noticed how quiet it was. No wind, no birds, nothing. It was like the air was holding its breath. I didn't go far. I turned around and went back when I started to lose sight of the cabin through the trees. That night, I lay in bed reading for a while before turning off the light. The silence was thick, the kind that made your ears ring. Around midnight, I heard something, a single thud outside, like a heavy footstep on the porch. I froze. Could have been an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. I didn't move for a few minutes, just listened. Nothing else. After a while, I told myself not to overthink it and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I stepped outside and saw something odd. The doormat had been moved. It wasn't in front of the door anymore but pushed to the side, like someone had kicked it. I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was from the wind or my own foot the night before. I spent the morning reading, cooking, and taking pictures of the forest. The peace started to settle in again. That evening, I noticed something small but unsettling. When I went to take a shower, I realized the shampoo bottle in the bathroom had been moved. I hadn't touched it since arriving. It wasn't a big deal, but it bothered me enough to check around the cabin. Nothing else seemed out of place. I locked the front door and made sure the back window was latched. The night came quickly again, and by 9, it was completely dark outside. I lay in bed scrolling through my phone until the battery ran low. The silence pressed down again. Around midnight, I heard something, soft but distinct. It was the sound of gravel crunching outside, slow steps, like someone walking carefully. I held my breath. The steps stopped for a few seconds, then started again, this time closer. They moved around the side of the cabin. My heart was beating hard. There were no other cabins nearby, no reason for anyone to be walking out there. I stayed still and listened. The sound stopped near the porch. Then came a faint creak, like weight on the wooden boards. I didn't move. I wanted to look out the window but couldn't bring myself to. After a while, there was silence again. I waited another half hour, then forced myself to peek through the blinds. The porch was empty. The gravel road beyond it was still. I told myself maybe it was an animal again, but deep down, I knew it hadn't sounded like one. The steps had been too slow, too heavy, like boots on gravel. I didn't sleep much that night. Every small sound made me tense up. Around dawn, I finally drifted off for a few hours. When I woke, I saw something on the outside window ledge. Muddy fingerprints, smeared and streaked. They looked like someone had leaned there, looking in. My stomach dropped. I packed my things right away, ready to leave, but before I loaded the car, I noticed something else. Behind the cabin, near the tree lean, the grass was flattened in a rough path. It looked like someone had been walking back and forth between the woods and the cabin. I wanted to get out of there, but curiosity made me take a few steps toward the path. It led to the edge of the trees, where I found a small clearing hidden behind the thick brush. There was a half-collapsed tent, dirty and covered in leaves, and beside it, a pile of trash, food wrappers, empty bottles, a worn-out backpack. Someone had been living there recently. I looked around and saw old footprints in the mud leading in different directions, some heading straight toward the cabin. The realization hit me all at once. Whoever had been out there wasn't just passing through. They had been staying close, watching, maybe using the Airbnb as a food source or shelter when guests came. My mind started racing with all the sounds I'd heard. The thud, the steps, the fingerprints. I went back to the cabin, heart pounding, and loaded everything into my car as fast as I could. As I pulled out, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the cabin fading between the trees. The woods looked calm again, but I couldn't shake the thought that someone might still be standing out there, just beyond the tree line, watching me drive away. I drove straight into town and stopped at a gas station. My hands were shaking as I told the clerk I wanted to report something strange about a rental property. Later, when I got a call from the county sheriff, he said they found signs of a squatter living behind the Airbnb for months. They hadn't caught anyone yet, but they'd found tools, clothes, and signs that whoever it was had been coming and going at night, even while guests were staying there. The thought of it made my stomach twist. Every sound I'd heard had been real. Someone had been outside that cabin while I was asleep, moving around, watching. It wasn't some ghost story or imagination. It was a person. I never booked a remote Airbnb again after that. Even now, when I look at listings with nice views and quiet woods, I can't help but picture that cabin. The muddy fingerprints on the window, the sound of slow footsteps in the gravel, and the feeling of being watched by someone hiding just out of sight. I booked the Airbnb because it was cheap, close to where I needed to be, and looked clean enough in the pictures. It was a small house outside of town, surrounded by trees, a bit isolated but not in the middle of nowhere. I arrived in the evening just before sunset. The road leading to it was narrow, cracked, and seemed to wind endlessly through empty fields and patches of woods. The house sat behind a thin gravel driveway, half hidden by overgrown bushes. There was a single light on the porch, flickering slightly, and no other signs of life anywhere around. When I parked, I noticed how quiet it was. Not the kind of quiet that feels peaceful. This was the kind that made you aware of every little sound your body made. My car engine ticking as it cooled down, the crunch of gravel under my shoes, my own breathing. The air smelled faintly damp, like old leaves and wood. I unlocked the front door using the code the host had sent, and the door opened with a dry groan. Inside, it smelled faintly of cleaning spray mixed with something older. Something musty, like a house that hadn't been lived in for a while. The living room was simple. A small couch, a table, and a flat-screen TV. There was a rug under the table that had some stains around the edges, the kind that looked like water damage. The kitchen was small but neat, everything in its place, though the refrigerator hummed too loud for the size of the room. The bedroom was at the back of the house. The bed was made, a folded towel on top. The window looked out onto the woods. The trees were so close you could almost reach out and touch them. As the light faded, those trees started to look like a solid wall of black. I unpacked a few things, made a cup of instant coffee, and sat down at the table to scroll through my phone. There was no service, not even one bar. I tried walking near the window, then to the front door, then outside onto the porch. Still nothing. I told myself it didn't matter, that I'd only be here for a night. But the thought of being completely disconnected made me uneasy. I went back inside and locked the door, trying to shake it off. Later that night, after eating a small dinner I'd brought with me, I sat in the living room scrolling through photos I'd downloaded earlier. The house creaked every now and then, but old houses do that. Around midnight, I decided to go to bed. I turned off all the lights except for the one in the hallway, just to keep some glow in the room. Lying in bed, I could hear the forest outside. Crickets, wind through the branches, sometimes what sounded like small animals moving around. It wasn't anything unusual, but I couldn't relax. There was this constant feeling that the house wasn't empty beyond me, that there was something faintly off, like the air itself felt heavier in certain parts of the room. Sometime past midnight, I woke up to a sound. It was faint but sharp, like a click. It came from the kitchen area. I stayed still, listening. The refrigerator hummed again, louder than before, but that clicking noise repeated, closer to the door now. It sounded almost like someone tapping their fingernail lightly against wood. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe it was just something expanding with temperature changes. But then there was another sound, something like the faint shuffle of footsteps on the tile floor. My chest tightened instantly. I stared at the shadowy outline of the bedroom doorway, too scared to move. The house stayed silent for a few minutes. I told myself that maybe it was an animal outside or the wind pushing against the porch. I wanted to believe that so badly that I forced myself to lie back down and close my eyes. Then I heard it again, this time from the living room. Slow, careful steps, like someone was trying not to be heard. The kind of sound that doesn't fit in a house that's supposed to be empty. My body went cold. I reached over to grab my phone out of habit, but I remembered there was no service. The realization that I couldn't call anyone made everything worse. I stayed frozen for what felt like an hour. The noises eventually stopped, but I couldn't sleep after that. Every sound, the refrigerator, the wind, the faint movement of branches outside, kept me alert. At some point, I noticed something else strange. The faint glow from the hallway light wasn't as bright as before. I thought maybe the bulb was dying. I got out of bed quietly and peeked down the hall. The light was dimmer because the door that led to the living room was now slightly open. I was sure I had closed it before going to bed. I could see part of the living room, a corner of the couch, and the table. Nothing moved, but my skin crawled at the thought that someone could be there, just out of sight. I closed the bedroom door slowly and locked it. The lock was small, more like something for privacy than security, but it made me feel slightly safer. I sat on the bed, staring at the door for a long time. The night felt endless. I must have fallen asleep for a bit because the next thing I remember was waking up to faint light seeping through the curtains. Morning had come, but it didn't make me feel better. I got up, opened the door carefully, and stepped into the hallway. The air felt stuffy and cold, even though the heater had been on. When I reached the living room, I froze. The chair at the table had been moved. It was pulled out slightly, like someone had sat there. My backpack, which I'd left next to the couch, was unzipped. My things weren't taken, just disturbed, shifted around, some things out of their places. I stood there staring, my brain trying to find an explanation. Maybe I forgot and did it myself? Maybe I got up in the night and didn't remember? But I knew I didn't. The details were too clear in my memory. I didn't waste any more time. I packed my things fast, barely checking if I'd gotten everything, and left the house. As soon as I got into my car, I locked the doors and started driving. When I finally reached town, my phone buzzed back to life with service. I checked my messages, trying to distract myself. Later that day, I got a message from the Airbnb host asking if everything had gone fine. I typed out a short reply saying it was fine, but I stopped before hitting send. Something about the way the host's profile picture looked suddenly caught my attention. It wasn't the same picture I remembered from when I booked it. The name was the same, but the photo showed a different person entirely. That night, when I checked the Airbnb listing again, it was gone. The page said the listing had been removed by the owner. The house didn't show up in search results anymore, and when I tried to view the booking details, it said, "No longer available." I don't know who was in that house with me that night, or if someone was living there without the real host knowing. I never reported it. I just deleted the app and decided I'd never stay in an Airbnb again. Even now, sometimes when I close my eyes, I still picture that small chair pulled slightly away from the table, waiting for someone to sit down again. I booked an Airbnb in a small town about 4 hours from where I lived. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend away to focus on some work and get a break from city noise. The listing showed a small, one-bedroom cabin on the edge of town, surrounded by trees and a gravel road that wound into the woods. The photos looked simple but clean. Wooden walls, a small deck, a single window that faced the forest. It seemed peaceful. When I arrived, it was late afternoon. The sky was dull gray and the air felt thick, the kind of heavy air that usually comes before rain. The cabin was smaller than it looked online. Paint was peeling from the edges of the window frames, and the deck had warped boards that creaked under my shoes. The forest around it felt unusually silent. No wind, no insects, nothing. I remember noticing that as soon as I stepped out of the car. Inside, it smelled faintly of old wood and something else. Something like damp fabric that had been shut away too long. The place had one small living area with a couch, a table, a kitchenette, and a door leading to a single bedroom. The bathroom was attached to the bedroom and had one of those small, high windows that barely opened. Everything was still and the air was stale. I unpacked and tried to settle in. The Wi-Fi was weak, but I didn't care much. I made a quick meal, walked around the property a little, and sat outside as the light faded. The forest looked endless. The trees were dense, and the gravel road disappeared into them after a short curve. There were no other houses visible in any direction. By the time the sky turned black, I realized I hadn't seen a single car or person since I got there. When it got dark, I went inside and turned on all the lights. The silence pressed in so thick it felt like it had weight. I turned on some low music on my phone just to have background noise. At some point, I noticed something odd. The small bathroom window had light coming from outside, a dim, flickering glow like someone walking with a flashlight. I stood still, staring at it, waiting for the light to move away. It faded after a few seconds, and I told myself it was probably a car turning somewhere down the road. Later that night, around midnight, I went to the kitchen to get water. As I passed by the window near the sink, I noticed something that made my chest tighten. There were faint, wet footprints just outside on the deck. Bare feet, not shoes. They led from the steps to the window and then back toward the edge of the deck. It had rained lightly earlier, so maybe they were old, but they looked fresh, shiny in the light from inside. I stared at them for a long time, then shut off the lights and tried to convince myself they'd been there before I arrived. I didn't sleep much. Every little sound felt too sharp in the silence. The ticking of the old wall clock, the hum of the fridge, even the soft creak of wood when I shifted in bed. Around 3 a.m., I heard something faint outside. Not footsteps exactly, but a soft scraping, like something dragging across gravel. It came from behind the cabin, slow and steady. I lay completely still, listening. After maybe 30 seconds, it stopped. I waited another minute, then got up and looked out the back window, but it was too dark to see anything. The next morning, I walked around the cabin. Behind it, the gravel was disturbed, and there were marks like something had been dragged toward the woods, thin, uneven lines. I told myself it was probably an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been close during the night. That evening, I noticed more small details that didn't sit right. The doormat was crooked even though I hadn't used it since I came in. The bathroom window was cracked open slightly, even though I hadn't touched it. A spoon I was sure I'd left in the sink was now on the counter. None of these things meant much on their own, but together they made my skin crawl. I checked all the locks twice and tried to relax. When night came again, I couldn't sit still. I turned off the lights and sat in the living room with only my phone light on, facing the front window. The woods were just black shapes, no movement, no sound. Around 11 p.m., I thought I heard something outside again. This time it was clearer, soft footsteps on the gravel. Slow, cautious, stopping for a few seconds, then moving again. My heart started racing. The steps stopped near the front of the cabin, maybe a few feet from the deck. I sat frozen, barely breathing. Then came the faint creak of wood. The deck boards. Something was on the deck. The sound moved closer, slow and uneven, as if whoever it was trying to be quiet. I turned off my phone light and sat in complete darkness, listening. I could hear each step, wood bending under weight, one slow foot after another. It stopped near the front window, just a few feet from where I sat. The silence that followed felt endless. After maybe a minute, there was a soft thud, something being set down gently, like a small bag or box. Then nothing. No retreating steps. Just quiet. I stayed like that until the first light of dawn came through the window. When it was bright enough, I finally got up the courage to look outside. On the deck, right outside the window, there was a small pile of rocks stacked neatly, about 6 or 7 high. Each one had a small smear of mud on it, and the bottom of the pile was wet, like it had been built recently. The footprints were back too, faint but visible, leading from the woods to the deck and then back into the trees. I packed my things in less than 10 minutes. When I went to load my car, I noticed something else that made me feel sick. The gravel road, the one I'd driven up on, had fresh tire marks, 2 different sets. Someone else had been there that night. I left without even looking back at the cabin. About half a mile down the road, I saw a man standing near the edge of the trees, not far from where the road curved. He wasn't doing anything, just standing still and watching the direction of the cabin. He didn't move when I passed, didn't look at me, just kept his head slightly turned toward the trees. When I got home later that day, I went back to the Airbnb listing to leave a review. The page was gone, completely removed. No trace of the host, no listing history, nothing. I tried searching the address, but there was no record of a rental property there at all. A few days later, I checked the news for that small town. Buried deep in the local section was a short article about an abandoned cabin found burned down off a gravel road just outside town. It didn't mention a name or owner, only that the police had found signs that someone had been living nearby. No arrests, no suspects. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the rocks on the deck and the footprints in the rain. I never found out who that man was or what he was doing out there, but I know that cabin hadn't been empty for a long time, and I wasn't supposed to find it. I booked a random Airbnb because it was cheap and close to the small town I needed to be in for a weekend job. It was listed as a quiet cabin with full privacy, just outside the city, about 15 minutes off the highway. The pictures showed a small wooden place surrounded by trees, with a gravel driveway and a fire pit in the back. It looked simple but fine. I didn't care about anything fancy, I just needed a bed for 2 nights. When I arrived, the road that led to the cabin was rough and narrow. My GPS showed I was close, but the last stretch was just dirt with deep ruts. My car bounced the whole way. It was already late afternoon, and the sun was dropping behind the trees, making the light fade faster. When I finally reached the place, it was smaller than I expected, almost like a hunting cabin. The trees around it were thick, pressing close on all sides. The place looked like it hadn't been stayed in for a while. The gravel driveway was mostly covered in leaves, and the porch had dirt and dead insects along the corners. Inside, it smelled like wood and old air, maybe mildew. There was a small living room, a kitchen with an old fridge that hummed loudly, and a narrow hallway leading to 1 bedroom and a bathroom. Everything looked like it had been cleaned at some point, but not recently. The windows were dusty, the floor creaked under every step, and the air was still and heavy. I opened a few windows to let some air in, but the forest outside was silent. No cars, no wind, no birds. I unpacked a few things and set them on the small table near the bed. My phone showed 1 bar of signal. I didn't think much of it. I wasn't planning to be online much anyway. I made something simple to eat and sat on the small couch. As it got dark, I realized how quiet it was. The kind of quiet that makes you notice every small sound. With settling, the fridge motor cutting on and off, my own breathing. Before sleeping, I locked the door, closed the windows, and turned off the lights. I laid on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The cabin made small noises, the way old wood does when it cools at night. Around midnight, I woke up for no reason. The first thing I noticed was that the fridge wasn't humming anymore. Everything was completely silent again. Then I heard something soft, steady footsteps outside, slow and crunching over the gravel. They came from the direction of the driveway, moving toward the cabin. I stayed still, holding my breath. The steps stopped near the porch. Then I heard a dull creak, like weight shifting on the old wood outside the door. I didn't move. I just waited, staring into the dark room, my heart hammering in my chest. After a few seconds, the sound stopped completely. I told myself it was probably an animal, maybe a raccoon or deer. Still, I couldn't sleep again for a long time. The next morning, the air outside was cold and wet. I stepped out and looked around the property. The gravel near the porch was scuffed up, and there were clear footprints in the dirt, boot prints. Someone had walked right up to the steps. I followed the marks to where they disappeared into the woods behind the cabin. It didn't look like a hiker's trail. There was no clear path, just tall grass and trees. It made me uneasy, but I tried to shake it off. I spent most of the day in town working. When I got back that evening, it was already getting dark again. The driveway looked the same, but I noticed something small. The trash bin by the side of the cabin had been moved closer to the wall. I hadn't touched it. That night, I made sure to check the locks again. The door had one of those cheap sliding locks on the inside, and I jammed a chair under the handle just in case. I tried to sleep but kept waking up. Around 2 a.m., I heard a faint scraping noise coming from outside the bedroom window. The sound was slow, like something dragging lightly against the glass. I froze, listening. Then the noise stopped, and after a long pause, I heard soft crunching steps again, moving away around the side of the cabin. I wanted to check, but I was too scared to look out. I stayed still until I finally drifted off near dawn. When I went outside in the morning, I saw clear marks on the window, smudges, almost like greasy fingerprints. They were high up, not at ground level. Someone had been standing there, looking in. My stomach twisted when I saw that. I checked my car next. The driver's door handle had dirt on it, like someone had tried to open it. I packed my things right away. I wanted to leave, but curiosity pulled me toward the back of the cabin, where I'd seen the footprints before. I walked a few yards into the trees, and the smell hit me, something foul and rotten. I pushed through some brush and found an old blue tarp covering what looked like a pile of wood. I lifted a corner and saw bones underneath. Animal bones at first, but mixed with them were pieces of clothing, shredded and dirty. A pair of jeans, a shoe, and what looked like a part of a jacket sleeve. My hands started shaking. I dropped the tarp and ran back to the cabin. I threw my bag into the car and sped down that dirt road as fast as I could without thinking. When I reached the main road, I stopped only long enough to check my phone. No signal still. I didn't stop again until I reached a gas station 20 miles away. I used their phone to call the sheriff's department and told them everything. They sent someone out, and I waited there until they called me back later that evening. The officer said they found the tarp and the bones, but they couldn't tell much right away. He also told me the cabin wasn't an active Airbnb anymore. It had been taken off the site 2 years ago after a previous guest went. It was early September when I booked an Airbnb for a weekend trip to clear my head. The listing was in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of a small town, about 4 hours from where I lived. The photos showed a simple, single-story house with white siding and a small porch. It looked normal, nothing fancy, but peaceful. The host had a few good reviews, nothing strange. I didn't think much about it. I just wanted to spend a few nights alone, somewhere quiet, away from the noise of everything. I got there late in the afternoon. The drive had been long, and the sun was starting to dip behind the trees when I pulled into the driveway. The house sat a little back from the road, surrounded by tall pines and a half-collapsed wooden fence. There was a motion light above the front door that flickered when it came on. The air was still, and I didn't hear any cars or voices, just insects buzzing somewhere in the grass. When I went inside, it smelled faintly of old wood and cleaning products. It wasn't dirty, but it didn't feel lived in either. The floorboards creaked softly under my boots, and the air inside was cooler than outside. I noticed right away that the house was strangely quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy. There was a small living room with a couch, an old TV, and a coffee table. The kitchen was to the right, with a small dining table and a single light bulb hanging from a wire. The bedroom was at the back, with one narrow window that looked out toward the trees. Everything seemed fine at first. I unpacked a few things, made a sandwich, and sat on the couch scrolling on my phone. But I kept noticing these little things, like how the front door didn't close evenly, it scraped the floor near the hinge, or how the lights would buzz faintly when I turned them on. And the worst part was the back window in the bedroom. The glass was clean, but the trees outside pressed close against it, so that even in daylight, the view was dim and shadowed. I couldn't tell if it was the way the trees leaned or if the window itself was slightly tilted, but it always looked like someone could be standing just behind the tree line, watching. That first night I slept lightly. The house made sounds all night, popping, clicking, little shifts in the wood. At one point I woke up because I thought I heard the soft squeak of floorboards, but it could have been anything. Old houses settle, I told myself. I rolled over and forced myself back to sleep. The next morning, I went for a short walk around the neighborhood. The nearest house was about half a mile away. There weren't many people around, just a long empty road lined with trees. Felt isolated more than I expected. When I got back, I noticed something odd. One of my shoes, which I had left near the door, was turned around. I had left them side by side when I came in last night, and now one of them was pointed toward the wall. I figured I must have kicked it accidentally, but it still made me uneasy. Later that day, while making coffee, I noticed a small, rectangular hatch on the floor near the kitchen counter. It was flush with the wood with a small metal ring handle. I hadn't seen it before. I bent down, grabbed the handle and pulled. It wouldn't move. It seemed locked or jammed. I checked under the counter, wondering if maybe there was a latch, but didn't see anything. I didn't think too much of it, though I did find it strange that something like that wasn't mentioned in the listing. That night, I decided to watch a movie. I turned off the lights and sat on the couch with my laptop. About an hour in, I heard a sound from the kitchen. A slow, dragging creak, like something heavy being moved across the floor. I froze and turned down the volume. The sound stopped. I waited a minute, then got up, my chest tight. The kitchen was dark, but the faint glow from the fridge light spilled across the floor. Everything looked exactly the same, except the small rug near the counter was bunched up, like someone had stepped on it or kicked it while walking by. I stood there for a while, listening. The silence felt thick. Finally, I turned on all the lights and checked the doors and windows. Everything was locked. I told myself maybe the house was shifting, maybe the rug just moved a little. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about the place wasn't right. The second night was worse. I kept waking up every hour, feeling like I'd heard something just before opening my eyes. Around 3 a.m., I heard a thump from somewhere beneath the floor. It was quick and dull, like a hand hitting wood. I sat up, heart pounding, and waited. Then I heard another, slower this time, from the same spot, near the kitchen. I turned on my phone flashlight and walked to the kitchen barefoot, every step echoing softly. The hatch was there, just as I'd seen it before, but now there was a faint mark on the wood beside it, like a scratch, fresh and pale against the darker floor. I pressed my ear to the floor. I thought I heard something faint, maybe movement, maybe just the old wood shifting. But when I stepped back, the floor under me gave a tiny, sharp creak, different from before. Felt hollow, like there was space beneath. The next morning, I planned to leave early. I packed my stuff quickly and checked the kitchen again. The hatch had dust around the edges, but I could see new scuff marks near the handle, like someone had tried to lift it from below. I didn't even finish my coffee. I went to my car and loaded my things. But when I turned the key, the engine didn't start. I tried again. Nothing. I checked under the hood, but I didn't know much about cars. The battery light flicked faintly, but it wasn't dead. It was like something had drained it. I went back inside to charge my phone and figure out what to do. The air inside felt different, stale, heavier. I noticed the living room window had condensation on it, even though it wasn't cold outside. I sat down at the table, waiting for my phone to charge, when I heard it again. A slow, dragging scrape from the kitchen, followed by a soft thud. My body went cold. I stood up slowly, looking toward the kitchen. The sound stopped again. The house felt like it was holding its breath. I took one careful step forward, then another. I could see the edge of the hatch. The metal ring was upright now, sticking straight up, as if someone had lifted it halfway. I didn't move. I just stared at it. A long, tense minute passed, and then another dull sound from beneath. Not a bang this time, more like a shuffle. That was enough for me. I grabbed my keys and walked straight out the front door. I locked it behind me even though it didn't matter. I started walking down the road toward the town, phone in hand, waiting for a signal. A tow truck came an hour later and took my car. I never went back into that house. When I looked at the listing a few days later, it was gone. The host's name was different, too. A few weeks later, out of curiosity, I looked up that address again. It wasn't listed on Airbnb anymore, but I found an old article. Years back, someone had been renting that same house when the owner went missing. Police searched the place but never found him. The article said there had been signs of someone living beneath the floor. I thought about that metal hatch, I booked an Airbnb on the edge of a small town in northern Oregon because I needed a quiet weekend away from work. The pictures looked perfect. An old but clean one-bedroom cabin tucked in the woods, with a gravel road leading to it. It looked private, peaceful, and cheap. The host's description mentioned it was once part of a logging property but had been fixed up for guests. That didn't bother me. I just wanted a place to sleep, eat, and relax for a few nights. I got there late in the afternoon, just before sunset. The driveway was narrow, and my tires kicked up gravel as I pulled in. The cabin sat alone at the end of a dirt road surrounded by thick trees. The woods were dense, dark green during the day and almost black underneath the tall pines. The air smelled like wet bark and moss. The cabin was small, maybe 20 feet across, with a tin roof and faded wood siding. There were 2 windows in the front, and one on the side near a short porch. The grass around it hadn't been cut in weeks, and I could see old footprints in the mud leading to the porch, maybe from other guests. Inside, it was simple but nice enough. Wooden floors, a small kitchen with a stove, a small bathroom, and a single bed pushed against the wall. There was a faint smell of old wood and something musty, but I told myself it was just from being shut up for a while. I unpacked, made a quick meal, and decided to take a short walk before dark. The woods behind the cabin stretched for miles. The trees were tall and close together, the kind that block most of the sunlight even in the afternoon. I walked a few hundred yards in and noticed how quiet it was. No wind, no birds, nothing. It was like the air was holding its breath. I didn't go far. I turned around and went back when I started to lose sight of the cabin through the trees. That night, I lay in bed reading for a while before turning off the light. The silence was thick, the kind that made your ears ring. Around midnight, I heard something, a single thud outside, like a heavy footstep on the porch. I froze. Could have been an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. I didn't move for a few minutes, just listened. Nothing else. After a while, I told myself not to overthink it and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I stepped outside and saw something odd. The doormat had been moved. It wasn't in front of the door anymore but pushed to the side, like someone had kicked it. I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was from the wind or my own foot the night before. I spent the morning reading, cooking, and taking pictures of the forest. The peace started to settle in again. That evening, I noticed something small but unsettling. When I went to take a shower, I realized the shampoo bottle in the bathroom had been moved. I hadn't touched it since arriving. It wasn't a big deal, but it bothered me enough to check around the cabin. Nothing else seemed out of place. I locked the front door and made sure the back window was latched. The night came quickly again, and by 9 it was completely dark outside. I lay in bed scrolling through my phone until the battery ran low. The silence pressed down again. Around midnight, I heard something, soft but distinct. It was the sound of gravel crunching outside. Slow steps, like someone walking carefully. I held my breath. The steps stopped for a few seconds, then started again, this time closer. They moved around the side of the cabin. My heart was beating hard. There were no other cabins nearby, no reason for anyone to be walking out there. I stayed still and listened. The sound stopped near the porch. Then came a faint creak, like weight on the wooden boards. I didn't move, I wanted to look out the window but couldn't bring myself to. After a while, there was silence again. I waited another half hour, then forced myself to peek through the blinds. The porch was empty. The gravel road beyond it was still. I told myself maybe it was an animal again, but deep down, I knew it hadn't sounded like one. The steps had been too slow, too heavy, like boots on gravel. I didn't sleep much that night. Every small sound made me tense up. Around dawn, I finally drifted off for a few hours. When I woke, I saw something on the outside window ledge. Muddy fingerprints, smeared and streaked. They looked like someone had leaned there, looking in. My stomach dropped. I packed my things right away, ready to leave, but before I loaded the car, I noticed something else. Behind the cabin, near the tree line, the grass was flattened in a rough path. It looked like someone had been walking back and forth between the woods and the cabin. I wanted to get out of there, but curiosity made me take a few steps toward the path. It led to the edge of the trees, where I found a small clearing hidden behind the thick brush. There was a half-collapsed tent, dirty and covered in leaves, and beside it, a pile of trash, food wrappers, empty bottles, a worn-out backpack. Someone had been living there recently. I looked around and saw old footprints in the mud leading in different directions, some heading straight toward the cabin. The realization hit me all at once. Whoever had been out there wasn't just passing through. They had been staying close, watching, maybe using the Airbnb as a food source or shelter when guests came. My mind started racing with all the sounds I'd heard. The thud, the steps, the fingerprints. I went back to the cabin, heart pounding, and loaded everything into my car as fast as I could. As I pulled out, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the cabin fading between the trees. The woods looked calm again, but I couldn't shake the thought that someone might still be standing out there, just beyond the tree line, watching me drive away. I drove straight into town and stopped at a gas station. My hands were shaking as I told the clerk I wanted to report something strange about a rental property. Later, when I got a call from the county sheriff, he said they found signs of a squatter living behind the Airbnb for months. They hadn't caught anyone yet, but they'd found tools, clothes, and signs that whoever it was had been coming and going at night, even while guests were staying there. The thought of it made my stomach twist. Every sound I'd heard had been real. Someone had been outside that cabin while I was asleep, moving around, watching. It wasn't some ghost story or imagination. It was a person. I never booked a remote Airbnb again after that. Even now, when I look at listings with nice views and quiet woods, I can't help but picture that cabin. The muddy fingerprints on the window, the sound of slow footsteps in the gravel, and the feeling of being watched by someone hiding just out of sight. I booked a random Airbnb on a whim. It was a small cabin just outside a quiet town in Tennessee, about 2 miles down a dirt road that cut through thick woods. I'd been traveling for work and needed a cheap place for 2 nights. The pictures online made it look clean and simple. Wood floors, a single bed, a small kitchen, and a deck facing the trees. It was cheap, isolated, and had decent reviews. I didn't care about luxury, just wanted somewhere quiet to sleep. When I arrived, it was already getting dark. The road that led there was narrow and lined with trees that leaned over like they were trying to block the way. The cabin sat back from the road, maybe 50 yards in, surrounded by overgrown grass and a few rusted tools near a shed. The driveway was just dirt mixed with crushed rock, uneven and rough. The porch light was on, glowing yellow through the screen door. I parked, got out, and felt the damp air hit me. It smelled like wet wood and leaves. Inside, the cabin was smaller than I expected but clean. There was a faint musty smell, like old fabric. A small kitchenette sat on one side with a half-sized fridge and a coffee maker. A couch faced a little TV on a stand. The floorboards creaked under my boots. I walked around, checked the bathroom, small but fine, and the bedroom, which had one bed with plain white sheets. There was one small window in that room that faced the backwoods. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. No cars, no wind, no bugs, just dead stillness. I unpacked and made some instant noodles, then sat outside on the deck to eat. The forest was so dark I couldn't see more than a few feet beyond the edge of the light. There were no sounds, not even crickets. I remember thinking that kind of silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy, like something was listening. Around 9 p.m., I went back inside and locked the doors. The cabin only had two, the main one and a back door that led into the woods. I made sure both were locked and even checked twice before going to bed. I woke up sometime after midnight to a noise. It was faint at first, like a slow, dragging scrape on wood. My first thought was that it came from the porch. I laid still for a while, listening. It happened again, a longer scrape, followed by a dull knock. My body went tense. The sound was definitely from outside, near the front. I looked toward the window, but all I saw was blackness. I didn't want to move, but I forced myself up and turned off the small lamp I'd left on. I stood there in the dark, listening. After a minute, it stopped. Then something else, a soft shuffle like footsteps in the dirt. Not fast, not running, just slow steps circling around. My first thought was maybe an animal, but it sounded too heavy for that. I stood completely still for what felt like 10 minutes. When nothing else happened, I finally sat down on the edge of the bed and tried to convince myself it was a raccoon or maybe branches scraping. I barely slept after that. The next morning, I walked outside to check. The air was cold and wet. The porch had long marks on it, not deep, but noticeable, thin scratches in the wood, uneven and fresh. They led across the front porch and stopped near the railing. I looked at the dirt below and saw a single footprint, just one. It wasn't mine. It was bare, wide, and deep in the mud like whoever made it was heavy. I crouched to look closer. It looked like it had been made sometime in the night, still damp. I didn't know what to think. Could have been someone messing around, but I didn't see any tire tracks or other prints. Just that one. I felt uneasy, but I brushed it off, went inside, and tried to ignore it. The whole day I stayed in the cabin, working on my laptop and keeping the doors locked. Around evening, I noticed something strange. The back door handle had fresh smudges, like someone had touched it. My hands had been clean all day, and I hadn't gone near that door. The marks looked like fingerprints, long streaks of dirt running down the metal. As it got dark, I decided I wasn't sitting there again listening to noises. I turned on every light in the cabin, locked both doors again, and sat on the couch trying to stay calm. I told myself I was being paranoid. Around 10 p.m., I heard a thump. Came from the side of the house, like something hit the wall. Then another higher up. I muted the TV and sat still. Another hit, this time behind the bedroom. I realized someone was throwing something, maybe rocks or sticks. I turned off the lights, grabbed the flashlight from my bag, and stood by the front door, trying to see out the window. The trees were swaying faintly in the dark, but I didn't see anyone. The air felt heavy, like everything outside had stopped moving again. Then I heard the crunch of dirt right outside the window. Slow steps. I froze. The sound stopped too, like whoever it was knew I'd heard. I waited for a long time. Then, suddenly, the handle on the front door moved. Just a small shake. But I saw it. The metal rattled. My chest tightened. I didn't make a sound. The shaking stopped, and I stood there with the flashlight gripped in my hand, heart pounding. After maybe half an hour, nothing else happened. I barely breathed until I saw faint light creeping in through the curtains. The next morning, I packed my things and stepped outside. The air smelled like rain and mud. The dirt by the front steps had more prints this time. Not just one, several. They circled the porch, leading around the side of the cabin toward the back. Some were deep, as if whoever it was had stood there for a long time. I walked around slowly and saw something that made me stop cold. Near the back door, half hidden under the steps, was a pile of broken twigs and something wrapped in plastic. I knelt and looked closer. It was a small plastic grocery bag filled with dirty clothing. Men's clothing, torn and soaked in mud. There was also a cheap kitchen knife, rusted at the edge. I didn't touch anything. I just backed away, got in my car and started driving. As I pulled out, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The cabin sat there quietly, porch light still off, the woods behind it thick and dark. Halfway down the road, I stopped and opened the Airbnb app to message the host. When I tried to send a message, the listing was gone. Completely removed. I refreshed the page, searched the name, the address, nothing. It was like it had never been there. I drove straight to town and found a motel. I didn't go back. I didn't even contact Airbnb after that. For weeks I kept checking the map, trying to find that same dirt road, but nothing matched. It's like the cabin had been erased. Sometimes I still think about those footprints. How deep they were, how they circled the cabin, how whoever it was must have stood right outside the window watching. And the worst part is knowing that they weren't trying to break in that night. They were just watching, waiting for me to stay another night. I went camping alone in late September, a few miles deep in a state forest that I'd never been to before. The weather had just started to cool down. The air smelled like wet pine and dirt, and the sound of crickets filled the woods as the sun started to drop behind the trees. I wanted a quiet weekend to clear my head, away from people and noise. I packed light, just a small tent, sleeping bag, food, and a flashlight. My plan was to hike most of the day, then set up camp near a small creek I saw on a map. It looked perfect. The trail I followed was narrow and uneven, covered in fallen branches and damp leaves. I could tell not many people came through that area. I didn't even see any trash or boot prints, which was rare. After a few hours, I found the creek. It wasn't wide, but the water was clear and cold, running between moss-covered rocks. The ground nearby was flat enough for my tent. I set it up, gathered some dry wood, and started a small fire. Everything felt calm and normal. I ate some canned food, watched the fire burn down, and listened to the quiet around me. As night settled in, the woods changed. The air got colder, and the usual chirping of crickets started to fade. It was replaced by random snapping sounds from deep in the trees. I figured it was just animals, maybe deer or raccoons. Still, every sound seemed closer than before. I sat near the fire until it turned into glowing embers and then crawled into my tent. I left the fire smoldering just in case I needed light. I woke up sometime later to a sound that didn't fit. It wasn't the soft rustling of wind or animals moving through leaves. It was heavy, like something solid hitting the ground. My first thought was that a tree branch fell, but then it happened again, closer this time. A dull, slow thud, followed by the faint crunch of dirt. I held my breath and waited. The sound stopped for a while, then came again, 2 slow steps and then silence. I reached for my flashlight and pointed it toward the thin fabric of the tent wall. I couldn't see much, just the dark outline of trees and the faint glow from the dying fire. I thought maybe it was a bear, but the steps didn't sound right. They weren't 4-footed or fast. They sounded deliberate, like someone walking carefully. I stayed completely still, barely breathing, my hand shaking around the flashlight. After maybe 10 minutes, the noise stopped completely. I told myself it was nothing and eventually drifted off again, though I didn't sleep deeply. I woke up again just before dawn. The fire was out. Everything was damp from dew. When I stepped out, the first thing I noticed were marks on the ground. Large footprints in the dirt near the edge of the camp. They weren't boot prints. They looked more like worn shoes, maybe work boots, but old ones, the tread almost gone. There were several of them, circling the area near the tent and stopping a few feet from where my head had been. I froze for a while, just staring. My stomach turned cold. I looked around but saw no one. The woods were silent again, just light wind through the trees. I packed my gear fast and decided to move farther down the creek, maybe closer to the main trail. I didn't want to go home yet, but I also didn't like the thought of someone walking around my tent at night. I hiked about 2 miles before finding another flat area near the water. I set up again, this time making sure the tent was between 2 large trees with only one open side. I didn't light a fire that night. I didn't want to draw attention. I ate in silence, sitting in the dark. The sound of frogs and insects came back as the sky turned black. I tried to convince myself the prints were old or that maybe I'd imagined how close they really were. Around midnight, I started hearing it again. Slow, spaced-out footsteps coming from behind the trees. They stopped and started several times. It was impossible to tell how far away they were because sound carried strangely in the woods. I turned off my flashlight completely and waited, trying to listen carefully. Then I heard something that made my skin crawl. The sound of something brushing against nylon. The side of my tent moved slightly, just enough for me to notice. It wasn't wind. I could hear breathing, soft, uneven breathing just outside the thin wall. My whole body went rigid. I didn't move. I could see the faint shadow of a head blocking out the moonlight through the fabric. It stayed there for several seconds, maybe longer. Then, without a sound, it backed away. The footsteps started again, slow at first, then fading into the distance. I didn't sleep at all that night. When the first light came, I unzipped the tent and scanned the area. There were fresh prints again, deeper this time and closer. Whoever it was had walked around the tent at least twice, stopping near the flap. I noticed something else too. One of my food cans was missing from where I left it on a rock. Not opened or eaten, just gone. I packed everything and started heading back toward my car. I didn't stop for breaks, even though the hike back was long and rough. My back ached, my legs burned, but I didn't care. When I finally reached the parking area, there was only one other vehicle there. A faded red pickup truck parked at the far edge. The windows were covered in dirt, and the plates were from another state. Something about it looked wrong, like it hadn't been moved in a long time. As I walked past, I noticed a pile of things in the truck bed. Old tarps, ropes, and what looked like camping gear, dirty and damp. Among the mess was a dented metal can identical to the one I'd brought. My exact brand. The label was half torn off, but I recognized it immediately. My stomach dropped. I didn't look inside the cab. I just kept walking straight to my car, unlocked it, and drove out of there as fast as I could. On my way down the dirt road, I kept checking the mirrors. For miles, I didn't see another car, just endless trees on both sides. When I finally hit the main road, I didn't stop until I reached a small gas station. I sat in the parking lot for a while, trying to calm down. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The quiet woods, the missing food, the prints. Someone was living out there, watching, waiting, maybe scavenging from campers. I never reported it. I didn't want to explain why I'd been camping alone miles off trail, but I haven't gone back to the woods since. Every time I think about setting up a tent again, I see that shadow against the fabric, the slow breathing, and the old footprints circling where I slept. And I know that somewhere out there, in those quiet woods, someone is still walking around at night, waiting for another fire to go out.